Judge, what's her name, Judy?
Judge Harvey.
Oh, yeah.
All right, it's 7:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. We appreciate everyone coming out tonight. I will say for the record, not a great turnout, and so that's disappointing for us, I would say, but we know, I'm hopeful we have a lot of people streaming at home, but also we record this. So that way, for those of you who have neighbors and friends in the community, I'd encourage you to share this with them because we have a very important issue to discuss tonight. And so tonight we're going to go through a briefer presentation that we've done for those who've been to our others, and really open up for question and answer so we can hopefully help you understand or at least address the concerns that you bring to our attention. This is our sixth public forum that we've held since last year, and this has been in a way for us to reach out and educate the public, but also get feedback. And so really what we focused last year on was about discussing this issue as a community and getting feedback on different options that the village has at its disposal to solve this. From those direct meetings we had last year, that's what provided the board the feedback to move forward with putting the home rule referendum on the ballot. The key thing I want to state though tonight is that the village does not have a stance on whether you should vote in favor or against it. We're here simply to educate you and provide you all the information that we have, and so that way you can make the best decision you can. The beautiful thing is we live in a democracy, and referendum mean that you as residents get to have the final say, not the board, and that's what we're here to do tonight. So tonight we're going to go through why are we pursuing home rule, how Rosa will use this to address mandated infrastructure improvements, and there's been a lot of information and misinformation that's been circulating as of late, and so we want to go through some fact or fiction about home rule, and then finally how the referendum would impact your budget at home. And we'll go to any Q&A. Also, people can virtually participate with Q&A. So those of you that are at home, please submit them through our digital channels. And those of you in the room, we obviously have a microphone set up so you can ask questions in person as well. I do want to recognize the people that are here with us tonight. So in the back, we have our board of trustees. We have Trustee Della Penna, Trustee Prokowski, Trustee Forsyth, Trustee Domke, Trustee Trejo, and Trustee Lanisa. Up front, I also have some of our department heads who will be helping with the Q&A. Starting on my left, your right, I have Chief Barretto of our police department. I have our public works director, Karen Young. I have our village administrator, Jason Blowski, and our finance director, Tom Dahl. We also have our fire chief in the audience as well, in case any fire questions do come up. So with that being said, we'll get started. So why is Roselle pursuing home rule? And so this is to help us finance the mandated improvements that we have to our sewer treatment plants. The village operates 2 sewer treatment plants, one that was built in 1928 and is still operational to date, and our other one is off of Central Avenue, the Boderman plant that was built in the 90s. In total, we have $80 million that we have to do in improvements. Now, $80 million is a lot of money. That represents over 4 years of our entire operating budget if we were to spend that on nothing but this. And so in order to pay for this in a responsible way, there's a tool available to us that are being provided by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. It's a subsidized loan. So essentially we borrow money at a lower rate. We have to pay that every year, kind of like your mortgage. And so in order to pay that loan back, we need to have an additional $4.5 million in our budget in order to do that. And so when we look at this, it's going to mostly cover our unfunded mandates that we have to cover, but we also know that there's other things that the village has not been able to address over time. Flooding continues to be a prevalent issue across the village and one that we try to address as we have money available. Streets are also a concern for us. The village has over 77 miles of streets that we're responsible for maintaining. A lot of those are coming to the point of needing to be updated since they were constructed in our last boom in the 70s and 80s. Currently, with our current funding mechanisms that we have for streets, we can only fund between 1.5 to 1.7 miles of street resurfacing a year. So if you do the math in your head, that means we're getting to every street once every 45 years. And so we know that we're going to have challenges with this as we try to keep up with demand, but also make sure Roselle's a livable community in, but also one for businesses to be successful in as well. And all that being said, I think it's important to highlight that the village is in this situation not because of its own doing, but because of regulatory burdens. The village has a AA plus credit rating. We've had over 9 years of consecutive balanced budgets, meaning we didn't budget more than we had taking in. And we've been recognized on a number of ways for our financial reporting for over 3 decades. We also have done a lot to show our economic value in the town is booming. We have attracted new businesses, our property values have gone up, and that doesn't happen if we were in a poor financial situation. The fact of the matter is there's things outside of the village's control that we have no say in that we have to address for us to continue to move forward. And so when we talk about home rule, there's a lot of information out there, and it can be portrayed in a lot of different ways. And I think what's important is in Illinois, when the Constitution was passed in 1970, it created a tale of two cities. You had cities that were home rule and cities that were non-home rule. Now, a non-home rule community traditionally has less than 25,000 people, and they have less authority to enact regulations. Essentially, a non-home rule community can only regulate what the state allows it to regulate. It also has less ability for revenue generation and other powers and things that you discuss with home rule. Now, home rule is granted to any community automatically that's 25,000. Now, the Village of Roselle sits at around 23,000. So we're very close, but I think as a board, we understand that we don't want to grow the town excessively because that would change the character of our community. A home rule community could also be granted authority by referendum, which is what the village is pursuing today. This gives them the authority to act more broadly. So instead of only being able to regulate what the state allows it to, they can regulate what the state says that they what they are can regulate what the state doesn't dictate that they can't. So the state can write out exceptions where our home rule communities are not allowed to touch this, and they would not be able to make those regulations. Over 60% of Illinois communities today became home rule through a referendum process, meaning they never met that population threshold, but it was done based on voter approval in their community. There's always one technology snafu each of these. So if this is it, then we're good. Thank you. So when we look at home rule communities in the perspective of Roselle, we have on the screen right now a map of our neighboring communities. Only one that touches us, 2 in our general vicinity do not have home rule, Itasca and Wooddale. Everyone else has home rule today. Bloomingdale actually passed it by referendum in 1996 by 86% approval because of a threat to their community. Their golf course was going to turn into a distribution center, and the community did not want to see that happen. Other communities in our area received it by population. And for us right now, the reason we're pursuing this is because of infrastructure funding, like we mentioned earlier, so that way we can generate a revenue source that isn't solely on the backs of our residents. One thing I would highlight is there's a lot of home rule communities in Illinois. There's about 221. What I would say is a lot of us have neighbors, we have friends, people that we go to church with, that we work with, that live in these communities. I would ask them what their experience has been with home rule. There's a lot of diverse different communities in our town, but in DuPage County, I think we have very different values and how we implement governance. And so there's a lot of things you can read about Chicago, but we're not Chicago. You can hear about a lot of things about collar counties and what they're doing, but that's not Roselle. That's not DuPage County. And so I think talking to people who live in Bloomingdale, Carroll Stream, Schaumburg, Hanover Park, that's very similar to the kind of culture that we have here in Roselle. Now, home rule provides a couple of things. One is a stronger local voice. And what we mean by that is that the municipality, Roselle, can make more decisions for itself. Today, the state of Illinois can have a lot of rules that they dictate to us or tell us what we can and can't do. That allows residents, neighbors that you elect to make decisions for our community. It also gives us more flexibility to respond to local issues as they arise. The one thing about a non-home rule community is the state has to give you authority. The problem is we know that crises come up and there's no time for the state to enact legislation to give us authority. Think about it. We've had a pandemic. Who would have thought that would have happened in our lifetime? No one thought to give the village different authority on that. Go back to 2020 when we had an Airbnb shooting in our town. We had limited options for how we could regulate it at the time and allow us to protect our community. Even today, migrants. We don't have the authority to regulate buses or hotel stays because the state doesn't grant us that ability to do that. And so there's a lot of things that we don't know what the future holds, but this allows the community to have tools to actually enact laws that make sense for them. It's also very important for public health and safety. There's things like crime-free housing that we discussed last month that you can view on our YouTube channel and on Facebook to understand how that can give us more ability to inspect licensed businesses and really crack down on those that are not behaving well in our town. One of the biggest complaints that we hear often is, why is this bad business operating still in the town? Why is this property owner still allowed to maintain their property in that way? The question is, we have limited authority to actually crack down on that. We're limited in terms of the fines that we can assess and also what we can do to disincentivize that kind of behavior. The other thing that would provide is also budget savings. And so what that would do is it would allow us to pursue a credit upgrade to be AAA, which means we would borrow at a lower cost, but also give us different options for financing and other options for seeking out revenue to afford future issues that could arise. So if we go to the next slide, how would the village use home rules specifically to support the infrastructure needs that we discussed? We know that we need 4.5 million to help us with our wastewater treatment plant. Our streets need additional work over the future, and we know we have stormwater concerns. By implementing a sales tax between 1 and 1.5%, that allow the village to recuperate money that could be used to solve that issue without doing it through water bills or other fines and fees that we have today that's solely on residents and businesses. By implementing a local gasoline tax, the village can collect money on anyone who fills up their tank in town to help go towards additional road resurfacing in the future. And for stormwater, depending on what rates we establish or as we grow our tax base, we attract new businesses to town and we continue to find new revenue, we can address a lot of the stormwater concerns that we have in our town by redirecting those revenue streams to that, or as we pay off our debt for the wastewater treatment plant. So moving to the next slide, how does this impact residents from a CIS perspective? And so one of the tools that we have that we'll talk a little bit more about is the capital improvement surcharge, or CIS rate, that is paid on everyone's water bill. It's a fix based on every 1,000 gallons that you consume on your property. And we've used this as a vessel to pay for our improvements over the years. This was something that prior boards did because they were struggling to keep up with it. And this is a fair way that they could raise the revenue with the current restrictions the village has. Today, our rates are currently $7.50. What we could do if we had the ability to implement a home rule sales tax, and you can see two different scenarios. The light green in the middle, it would be with a 1% sales tax, and the dark green on the right is with a 1.5% sales tax. We can reduce the necessary increases to water bills to keep it below $10. And in the 1.5% sales tax, we can keep it flat from today through 2032 based on our current projections. The nice thing about a sales tax is you pay it, and you're going to pay no matter what, but it's done incrementally over time. You make a small purchase, you pay that sales tax then and there. But not only you, but anyone who comes to the village, shops, eats, they also pay that as well. And that's a way for us to not burden just residents with these types of taxes. We go to the next slide. You'll see what would happen if we did not have the referendum pass. Because of our non-home rule status, we have limited opportunities to grow revenue today. And so if we did not have that authority, we have to pay these bills no matter what. Doing these upgrades is not an option. The EPA is telling us that this needs to be completed by the end of the decade. And if we fail to, permits could be pulled, fines could be assessed, and the village would be in a far worse financial position trying to manage through that. And so in order to pay back those loans that we have to start taking out here soon, CIS rates are projected to go from today at $7.50 all the way up to $20 by 2032. And that's something that not only impacts residents, but that also impacts small businesses, other people that want to open up and do things in our community. And so if we go to the next slide, numbers like that kind of are hard to understand. And so if we were to look at this, this shows you on an annual basis, based on average billing, what that could mean. And so for residents, the average community, or rather household, uses about 4,300 gallons a month. What that would mean is by the time you got to 2032, you'd be paying over $1,000 in CIS through your water bill. Today, you're spending about just under $400. With the sales tax, we can keep that down to between $387, like we're paying today, to $516. So almost reducing that total impact by 50%, depending on the sales tax rate. And that's looking at for residents. We go to the next slide. What would that mean for a small business? We have a lot of restaurants. You got to wash those plates. You got to prepare food. We've got a lot of small businesses that do a lot of water consumption. So what would that mean for a business owner? Currently, an average commercial or industrial account in this village uses just over 15,000 gallons of water. So today, they spend about $1.4 thousand on their CIS annually. If the referendum does not pass, they would see that increase to over just shy of $3.8 thousand annually in water bill fees. And so we know that this is something that could become an issue for our community members, but also for our businesses in the town. The other things that could happen if home rule does not pass is we'd have limited tools to help us with infrastructure. So we highlighted how CIS rates and water bills would increase, but we know there are other issues out there. Streets are still going to continue to need increased funding. We still need to tackle stormwater. The only other opportunities we have today would be to increase vehicle stickers, look at expanding our existing utility tax and other fines and fees that we can assess on residents or businesses. I should note there is a misconception out there that somehow non-home rule communities cannot implement a utility tax, and that's not the case. We have a utility tax today, and want to make that very clear for everyone. The other option that could happen is we couldn't probably increase those fees enough. Let's be honest. No one likes paying vehicle stickers today enough as it is. Us doubling it's not going to solve the problem for us either. So the other reality, and what we do typically as a village to keep our budget balanced, is we would delay critical projects or defer maintenance, continue to kick that can down the road, and hope that we have the funding later to solve those problems. A question that comes up every once in a while is, well, if it doesn't pass this time, put it up again. In Roselle, it takes multiple chances, right? Home rule is legally restricted to be put back on a ballot until a minimum of 23 months after it's been on the last ballot. So we'd have to wait a whole 2 years before the village could reconsider home rule again in the future. And so transitioning to some of the facts and fiction that's out there, we'll be very brief and blunt about a lot of these items. And so hopefully these will be conversation starters for you here tonight or later when you go back home. So the first thing is home rule can be removed by referendum. That's a fact. And that home rule is a permanent status somehow, and that's false. It can be removed by the board itself, or it can be removed by referendum, which can be triggered by residents themselves. You can go get petitions and get it on the ballot, and you could revoke it. Now, out of all the municipalities that have gained home rule, 2/3 have received it by referendum, and only 5 have had it taken away. Communities have shown and established the trust with their community that they can handle those the responsibilities in a reasonable way. If we go to the next slide, there's a lot of concerns about property taxes. And it is true that with home rule, you can raise property taxes more than you could as a non-home rule community. Now, the fact, though, is that the village has committed itself to not raising property taxes over PTEL. Which means today, our current authority, we raise property taxes by inflation or 5%, whichever is lower. There's only been 2 times in history where we've actually raised it by 5%, and this past year is one of those. The average impact on a home was $26. The village is only about 10% of your property tax bill, and those property taxes go towards things like paying for our police, our fire, our roads to be plowed. And so property taxes don't go to infrastructure. None of that goes to that. And so for us, the problems that we're having, we would never rely on property taxes. And the other thing is, we live in this town too. I don't want to pay more property taxes. My parents are on a fixed income. I have a number of family members on a fixed income. Water bills or property taxes going up can be detrimental. And so we don't want to disrupt our community by being irresponsible and playing with this. The other thing is, if you look at the history in Illinois, other communities, there's no evidence that home rule communities increase property taxes or have higher rates than those that are non-home rule. Because at the end of the day, that's an attraction issue. If you want people to come into your community, having high property taxes is a deterrent. And the whole point of home rule is that you can spread out your revenue through other buckets and not rely on one single bucket for that. In fact, in the Northern Illinois study, less than 18% of communities actually use their property tax authority as a home rule community. So the next one, it's fiction that the village has to get voter approval to make infrastructure improvements or to take out loans. There's this idea that if we had home rule, there'd be no more referendums in this town. The village could run mad with power and do whatever they want. And that's not the case, because even as a non-home rule community, we don't have to go to referendum. We already make decisions for this community today without going to you for a referendum to approve loans, to approve other things that we do in terms of investments. And this doesn't impact any investments or rather referendum that would happen from another taxing body, like a park district, a library district, or a school. Those are all independent bodies, and home rule doesn't change anything about how those taxing bodies operate today. And so we as a village already have a lot of authority to make sure that operations run smoothly, and we use that authority today. Now, a fact is home rule communities are authorized to create a real estate transfer tax. That is something that is true. But what's false is that the board could enact that. That has to be done by a voter referendum, just like we're doing today. So if the board in the future or tomorrow ever wanted to do a real estate transfer tax, they would have to put it on the ballot and the entire village would have to vote on it. And this board has committed to not wanting to do that. Because again, back to property taxes, that creates a barrier for our community to be successful and a deterrent for economic development in our town. It's something that we do not feel is appropriate. But you as voters ultimately have to make that decision. No, you're good. And so fiction, home rule means more control over schools, parks, and library districts. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, I got a little bit ahead of myself there. The village does not oversee schools in this town. We do not oversee parks or library districts. Every community is different. In fact, some communities, they don't even oversee their fire department. And so when you compare different communities, we're not all the same. And so if this were to pass, it does not change the need for other community groups to go to referendum and would not allow us to unilaterally enact certain things for those taxing bodies. Now, it is a fact that home rule communities are less restricted on creating new regulations. They can exercise more authority than a non-home rule community. That's absolutely true. But they can only exercise authority that the state allows. We can't supersede the Constitution. We can't run amok with power in that sense. There are limitations that still exist for any community. And it is a fact that home rule communities are subject to fewer state mandates. In Springfield, and if you look at our fireside chats when I spoke with Senator Lewis, a lot of bills in Springfield have riders that say this excludes home rule communities, meaning they're regulating all other communities and allowing home rule communities not to deal with those regulations and burdens. And so this would allow us in certain areas to not be affected by new laws that the state is enacting. We go to the next one. It's false that home rule powers are limitless. And the fact is that there are things that we cannot supersede, as I mentioned, areas of state and federal law. We cannot impose all taxes. We can't impose a tax on income earnings or occupation. And we cannot incur unlimited debt. That's a huge thing. That is a misconception. We couldn't just pile ourselves with all sorts of debt because we have home rule. There's a lot of limitations still on communities. And so it's important with all that information that the board understands that there's a trust factor at the end of the day. And while we are elected by you, and you could unelect us very easily, there's an election next year, we have made 3 different commitments because it's important for you to understand where we stand and how we intend to use that authority. And one is, as I mentioned before, property tax increase limitations. If home rule were to pass, the board already passed an ordinance restricting itself to not increasing property taxes above its current authority. So inflation or 5%, whichever is lower. We've also committed to evaluating by the end of 2025, whether vehicle stickers could be retired or reduced without negatively impacting our budget and our services. Finally, a lot of this hinges on the fact that we are going to stabilize and stop the increases to the water bills. And so we've committed already to, if this were to pass, restrictions on at most how we could increase CIS. And so looking at through 2029, it could only increase $2 at most. Now, I think what's important is this is our last forum. There's still one more opportunity to interact with the board and ask questions. And so if there's things that come up, please join us on Saturday, March 9th, thank you, for coffee with the board. That's right here in Village Hall, and it's an informal setting. Today, it's very formal. We have mics, and we're sitting up here in this format, but it's a great way to just casually ask questions. And we do this throughout the year. And it's an opportunity to get to know the board members, but also to express your concerns in a very friendly manner. We also are available at village board meetings. The state of Illinois doesn't allow public comment in the same way that a village board does. I don't know the last time you've met or talked to your state representative or senator, talked to the governor about policy and what you feel like. And so the board is always available to the people, and at all of our meetings, we meet twice a month. You can submit public comment and engage with us on issues, make your voice heard on any legislative matter that we have before us. So if we go to the next slide, I think this is the important thing for a lot of people. At the end of the day, we have costs that we have to pay for. And so what does this mean to you as a resident? How will this impact your budget? And so here's an example with our water bill as far as on the left with blue, what a water bill would look like in 2032 without home rule, and what a water bill could look like with home rule. And so again, going back to those increases that we talked about for CIS, you can see the first line shows your water rate. And we don't know what water rates we'll have in the future. We buy water from the city of Chicago. That's a pass-through for us as far as how much we charge you because we have no control over that. The DuPage sewer rate, and we have a Cook County sewer rate too, but that's something that depends on costs for infrastructure and taking care of those lines in the street. But the CIS rate, we know we can project would be $20. And so if you look at that, taking all those other factors aside, your bill each month would be about $156.31, assuming you have average usage. If you use more, it could be more. If you use less, it could be less. But that would amount to about $1,800 a year in water bills for the average household. Now, if we had home rule and we were able to implement a sales tax between 1 and 1.5%, that same water bill could be reduced and held down to just $1,200 to just shy of $1,400 a year. And so that's a savings of about $500 to $600 for a household. Go to the next slide. When we look at this option, at the end of the day, yes, a yes vote for home rule would allow us to fund mandated projects with a home rule sales tax instead of relying solely on our capital improvement surcharge fee that's assessed through our water bills. Voting no would mean that we're going to be funding our mandated projects with increasing water bills, increasing the cost on residents and our businesses directly. Now, when we think about your budget, a sales tax is a little bit hard because everyone's different. Water consumption's easy. You use it, you get billed for it, right? Everyone has different purchasing behaviors. And so it's hard to nail down exactly what your sales tax impact would be. But there is some misconceptions out there. A home rule sales tax is not eligible for medicine or medical devices. You cannot tax food that's purchased at a grocery store, which we do have one in town. I know a lot of people like to forget that Montrose Market exists, or a vehicle purchase or a lease. And so we do have a lot of car dealerships in our community, but this tax would not apply to that. And so this is something that I think a lot of people are fearful. If I'm going to Walgreens, am I going to have to pay more for my prescription drugs that I need to live? That's not going to be the case. There's a lot of exceptions to what is eligible for a home rule sales tax. So if we go to the next slide, everyone's budget's going to be different. And we have a worksheet in the pamphlet. If you didn't grab one on the way in, please do. For those of you at home, this is going to be mailed to every resident in the next couple of days. But look at your budget. How much do you spend eating in Roselle? How much do you shop? And if you were to fill up a tank once a week, what would that be for your household? So assuming $200 on Roselle restaurants a month, $100 shopping, and filling up your tank once a week with 15 gallons, you're talking about an impact between, depending on the rate that we would establish, $4 to $6 a month. That means it's about $50 or $70 a year that you'd be impacted with that. And no two budgets are the same, and everyone will be impacted differently. But as opposed to a water rate increase, your sales tax is going to be dependent on your available income to spend. And so when we go back to evaluate it, again, voting yes for the referendum would allow, again, the village to implement a home rule sales tax, would allow us to lower water bills and keep CIS rates stable. It would allow us to improve streets more readily and allow us to have a stronger local voice and additional tools to help solve problems for Roselle. Voting no on the home rule referendum means that we would have to fund mandated improvements through water bill increases solely. And so water bills will increase. We would not be able to find or seek out meaningful additional street improvements without increasing other resident fees like vehicle stickers and other fines. And we'd have a stronger Springfield influence in the affairs of Roselle like we have today. And so with that being the case, we hit my goal of a half an hour, so I'm happy with that. We're going to open it up to Q&A. And so to make sure that we are being respectful of everyone, I know that the audience is so packed here tonight that it's going to be hard. Everyone's going to be clamoring to ask questions. But we do want to ask people to ask one question at a time and allow other people who may have a question. We are also monitoring and having questions come in online. So if we do deviate away from the podium, it's not to be rude or disrespectful. We just want to be fair and keeping it balanced in both ways. And so we just ask it come up, if you don't mind just stating your name and then asking your question, and we'll try to address it as best as we can. So do you have any questions to kick us off?
We do. We have a few submitted online. The first question is, if home rule is passed, would we lose any opportunities for grants from the state?
So no grant application is based on home rule or non-home rule status. And the village has been really good about pursuing grants to date. I think one of the things about grants that I'll just go on a side note on, they're usually not for sewer plant upgrades. In fact, there's no grants that we're aware of today that would allow us to pay for this through grants. When we approached a lot of places about it, it's kind of seen as a core service. It'd be like getting a grant to pay for police officers or to pay for employees. They're not going to do that because that's seen as that's your responsibility. And so that would not impact our ability to go after additional grants at all. In fact, if anything, I would say having additional revenue would allow us to probably meet more grant application requirements. And what I mean by that is you rarely can apply for a grant and say, we have an idea about what we want to do. Can you fund it? We usually have to spend a lot of money before we can even apply for a grant. We usually have to do a feasibility study. Sometimes we need to do phase 1 engineering and show that we have the viability of a project before they would even give us money. And so that might actually help us achieve more grants for other projects, just not these mandated improvements.
Another question we received online is, how long would the home rule taxes / increases be enacted? Will this be permanent?
So nothing, including the promises from the board, are permanent. Anyone could get elected tomorrow and change policies. And I'll be very blunt and honest about that. But I think that's on us to elect people who have sound, rational decision-making that have the best interests of our community. And so to that extent, I'll turn it over to our finance director to talk about the length in terms of these ILEPA loans that we have to take out, because that is a certainty. And I'll have a caveat at the end of that. But.
So the loans are 20-year loans. We currently have about $18 million outstanding, which we are paying back. These, though, would probably start in between 2027. We'd be taking these out and starting to have to pay them back. So we'd be looking at about the year 2047 when they would expire. So, we would need that full 20 years to pay these back.
And so when we're talking about a horizon of 20 years, a lot can happen and change. And so I think the one thing is 5 years, 10 years ago, what we're dealing with today was not even something on our radar. We didn't expect the EPA to say that we had to change how we treat water to this extent. And so what I will say is, while we will try to grow our economy, continue to make sure we have a big tax base that can help pay for this and escalate the amount of money that we get in without doing rate increases, we don't know what the future holds. And so while we have a sunset on when those loans would end, we know that there could be other future obligations out there that we would need to meet, but it's a pretty large horizon out there. And that's why we're looking at big issues, because without this, water bills aren't going to just suddenly go down quickly, right? They'd be up for a long period of time. And so that's something serious for us to consider. It's not like the water bills would come down after 10 years.
We have one final question submitted online, not that we won't get more in the future, but for now, I noticed most of the examples reference DuPage County. Some of us in Roselle live on the Cook County side. How would it affect Cook County residents that live in Roselle?
It's a great question. So for those of you who aren't aware, about 13% of the village is located in Cook County. For CIS, or the Capital Improvement Surcharge Fee, it is the same no matter what county. Cook County has a different sewer rate than DuPage County because they're actually part of the MWRD, or Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. It's a conglomerate of a lot of suburbs in Cook County, and they treat their sewage water together. And because they're a part of that system, they have a separate rate. Everyone in DuPage County is treated in Roselle by Roselle. And so when we talk about the impact on all of our community, Cook County is absolutely going to have the same dollar impact. Now, you might reflect on that. If that money is going towards taking care of our treatment plants and you don't use it, it might be seen as a little bit unfair to Cook County residents, potentially, because they're going to a different treatment plant that these upgrades aren't going towards. So there's that element for the Cook County residents that's different, but financially it's the same no matter where you live in this town.
We spoke too soon. We got one more online. Does the village have hard data that shows how much gas is actually purchased by folks other than Roselle residents?
So with anything, I think there's a thought that if we're government, we have all the answers and we have all the data. And so we don't know the zip code of every credit card transaction that happens in town. Now, what I can tell you, at least on the sales tax side, is about 40% of our revenue comes from industrial companies. And what I can say about that is I highly doubt that a resident is buying large quantities of electrical wiring and conduit, buying office furniture in bulk, or buying custom packaging palleting materials from an international distributor. So when we talk about that, we know at least that from a sales tax perspective, there's at least 40% of sales that are business to business transactions. And when it comes to gas tax, we don't have that visibility today. And that's where I think from a board perspective, we wouldn't be just enacting a suite of policies day one. we would at least go ahead and implement a sales tax quickly because we have data on that today that we have from the state to help us make a decision. For a gasoline tax, I think we'd have to do a lot more research and probably take a more metered approach where we might start at a cent to get data that we are entitled to then and evaluate what those returns are before we made any rash decisions. But we don't have any data on the gasoline tax today. We just have a very conservative projection. What I will say is when we do any of our budgeting, we always underguess what we're going to get in revenue and overguess what our expenditures are going to be. And so when we made all these projections, we made sure that we were conservative to the point where we would hope that we could exceed these targets or at least come in if there was an economic downturn. I don't know, Tom, if you want to speak to anything about our financial modeling on that.
No, you're correct, though. We did the gasoline tax was an estimate based on us having to call each one of the gas stations to see what they sold in a year. So in order to, no, we don't have that information, but, and David, you're correct. We always try to budget conservatively on the revenue side because we don't want to overestimate what we are going to receive. But, what we have shown so far is, at least on the rate side, we've tried to be as accurate as possible looking into the future to see what that impact would be.
Any questions from our audience members? Yeah, if you don't mind. If you could just speak in the microphone though for everyone at home. Okay, can we give you the microphone then here? Is that okay? Okay, well, for the people at home though, because you have a great question, I want to make sure they can, that's all.
No, I just had a comment.
Okay,
We've gotten robocalls and old mayor letters and board member letters. And isn't that a little overdoing it there with some of that?
so the village hasn't done any of those things, is what I would say. We haven't, we can't engage in a campaign. And so I know there's a private citizen group that's active about trying to advocate for it. There's also groups that are against it. I don't know who's behind the robocalls, and I'm not going to speculate, but I think that those calls are being directed to get information to have a campaign that would encourage people to vote against it. What the village has done is hold a number of public forums to make sure people have the opportunity to talk to us. And we've been trying to use our publications through e-news, online when we do short videos, and through a special publication that'll go out to educate. We haven't gone and sent letters to people or things of that nature. Like, we can't control what the private political market goes. And I think unfortunately in this day and age, I wish we could just, as voters, be allowed to digest information and make our decisions. People make a lot of money off of campaigns, unfortunately. And I think it's unfortunate that we're seeing that happen here.
Ulterior motives, apparently.
Seems like everybody's desperate over this. Bombarded
Yeah,
twice a day.
yeah.
Very disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it's a serious request, and I don't think the board took this action to actually put this on a ballot with light intentions. We listened to the public for a whole year, and out of the forums we had last year, we presented 3 options. One was water bill increases, one was a non-home rule sales tax, which would still be a voter referendum, but it was capped at 1%. The other was home rule. And because 1% doesn't fully fund it, what we overwhelmingly heard from residents that participated in our fact-finding stage last year was that over 60% of residents said that they would prefer the village pursue home rule than a non-home rule sales tax. And so when we have, as a village, have gone out here to make decisions, we've tried to make sure we had resident feedback at the center of that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever you decide is going to be the decision for this community, right? And so I apologize that other people are getting involved in it.
That's okay. I think Roselle did do a good job of outlining the situation in the Roselle newspaper. And, that's enough to make a decision right there, I think. And,
Thank you so much. And the nice person on staff who does it's right over there. So I'm sure she appreciates hearing that. So you never know, people are picking up and reading it. So thank you.
I don't think the old mayor really cares too much one way or another. What happens to Roselle right now?
He lives in Huntley.
Right. Well, what I will say is Huntley is home rule too, but that's a whole story for another day. So thank you so much. Any other questions from the audience before I go back to online questions? Oh, yes, absolutely.
This isn't a question, just an announcement. I'm with the League of Women Voters, Roselle Bloomingdale, and I'd just like to announce to Roselle residents that 2 weeks from tonight, there'll be another opportunity to look into this because the league is hosting a home rule forum at the library, February 29th at 7 p.m., and we will have representatives from 2 contiguous communities that have had home rule for a while. Bloomingdale, the village manager of Bloomingdale, and the mayor of Hanover Park, as well as the executive director of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Association. So it'll be a chance for you to come and hear from them what home rule's done in their communities, what the impact has been, any cons if there have been, and another chance to ask questions. So everybody's invited.
Thank you. Do we have any new online questions or comments? Then one thing I'll do, since we do have some time, is we do have our panel of experts, and I think one thing is we're a professionally managed village. And what that means is I, as mayor, the board, we're not involved in the day-to-day operations and telling people, go plow that street, go fill that hole, go buy that cop car. We're here and empowering staff to make a lot of daily decisions. And I think that's the biggest change that's happened since the 70s, is there's people who are professionally educated, and this is their career. And so I think it would be nice, since we have some time and a lack of questions, if each of you could just briefly, kind of from your perspective from a department, what home rule would mean from an efficiency or from an operational perspective. And so I'll start with our police chief to put him on the spot first.
All right.
5 minutes, so, or less.
From the police standpoint, the police department presented on on what home rule means for us. And one of the things that it means for us was the opportunity, not that we would do it, but the opportunity to go for crime-free multi-housing. So crime-free multi-housing is something that involves, it's 3 phases. And what you can do is us working with landlords, some of which may not live in Roselle. They may be in other states. And it allows us to work in conjunction with landlords to keep their properties from becoming a nuisance. So the way it works is the first part of it, of this 3-phase approach, is it is a seminar that we hold for the landlords in Roselle. And part of it is working, like I said, in a partnership with them. And then what we do is let them know what the legislation is. Hey, you are a landlord in Roselle and also in the state of Illinois, and you are held accountable for certain things and how you treat your tenants. So it goes with the landlord holding them accountable, making sure that they're protecting the rights of the people who live there. But then the other thing that the village gets is the first phase is based on a lease addendum that goes anytime somebody signs a lease in Roselle. And so what it does is they sign a lease that says, hey, there's a bunch of crimes that they are committed in my property by somebody who lives at my house, who's visiting, something like that, then that is a violation of the lease, and they could be held accountable and they could be evicted from the residence. Now, we're not looking to evict somebody for one thing that happens. We're talking about a nuisance. These things would constantly happen. So if somebody was in an apartment and then they threw a big party and something happened where the police were called, that would be a violation of the addendum that the person who rented the apartment signed. So that's the first thing. So the second thing, the second phase of it is a property survey and on the principles of CPTED. And CPTED is just an acronym that is crime prevention through environmental design. So the police department would then go and do a security survey and work with the landlord and make sure that the property is up to snuff and it's less likely to be a focal point of crime. Things like making sure the strike plates on all the doors have at least 3-inch screws in them, making sure that the peepholes cover 180 degrees, making sure that the shrubbery is trimmed up so that people wouldn't be able to hide behind it, making sure that there is specific physical barriers on the property which would delineate the property from adjacent properties. And now this is not for every place. This does not mean if somebody owns a single family home in Roselle and they rent it out, suddenly there's cameras and there's lights and it's a problem for the neighbors. But that's what the security survey is for. And then finally, the third phase of this is a neighborhood watch program. So as part of the crime-free multi-housing, the property owners would be required to hold some sort of neighborhood watch, which gets the residents together. And then in that neighborhood watch meeting, the residents would be taught how to spot crime, how to spot things that are happening in their community. And it kind of just it puts us, everyone, a bunch of eyes on the community to make sure that the property is upkept well and that they keep crime and nuisance out. So it's a much longer program, but in just a few minutes, that's what we see from a police department standpoint, and that's how that's what would help the town. Now, that doesn't mean, like I said, that we would do it, but those are the things that are available to us right now.
If you want to learn more about that, that's available on our YouTube channel. We did a whole session on this. I think there was some great dialogue, so I appreciate that. I'm going to just check in with Emily. Any new questions? Any new questions from the audience? I'll turn over to our Public Works Director, Karen Young, just to speak briefly about what this could mean for Public Works in terms of these regulations.
Sure. Good evening. We've talked a lot about infrastructure. Public Works is responsible for maintaining not only our wastewater treatment plants, but all of our water infrastructure that travels to your home and services water to your homes, as well as roadways and sidewalks and parking lots throughout the community. We talked a lot about the regulatory side of things, and we have no control over the regulatory improvements that are necessary. We will be starting about the $80 million worth of improvements starting in 2025 to 28 to meet those regulatory improvements. But I think one thing that we need to touch on a little bit more is the fact that these treatment plants run 24/7. They don't shut down. They don't, like, we go home and take a nap or sleep at night. These facilities never shut down. So that infrastructure is highly taxed all the time. I don't think a lot of people think when you flush your toilet where it goes to, and much of this improvements are related to that. But in addition to that, it's our roadways. As the mayor mentioned, we have about 77 miles of roadways. Typically, the life cycle for a pavement is about 20 years to grind and overlay that. If you see, we've got a lot of communities that were built in the 70s and 80s and 90s that are coming to the end of that term, and it would provide us the opportunity to be able to have a higher level of service and what you physically see out there from a day-to-day, as well as, you know, our sidewalks, as well as curbs and the other things throughout the community. So I think the things that you visually see are very important, but it's also what's underneath the ground, being able to maintain that, and higher levels of stormwater as well, improvements. We've got a lot of areas that we've been studying throughout the community that we recognize need improvements, and this would allow us that benefit to be able to do those improvements, and provide, you know, greater service to the community with that.
Sidewalks are also a frequent topic, crosswalks even, and that kind of safety. I know we've done a lot of studies, but those also come at a very steep cost that we've kind of had to defer or not do because of that.
Yes, we do very minimal with that. We meet what needs to be done for trip hazards, but you know, the life cycle of those again are coming to the end, and streetlights as well. Streetlights is another one that we've been looking to increase over time, and that would provide us the opportunity to do that as well.
Thank you. I know one thing that I'm really proud that this board has been able to do is we've put out schedules and we're looking at everything that the village delivers and understanding what our upcoming investments we're going to have to do, as opposed to before. I think it was a much more, we have X number of dollars left over. Where do we want to throw it towards? And so that only gets you so far. And I think we're getting to a point where the age of our community and what we have from a modern perspective of streetlights, sidewalks, water mains, sewer treatment plants, buildings and facilities. This building, police, fire, we have to maintain the buildings that those people work in. And all those things have a lot of expenses associated with it. And with inflation and whatnot, there's only so much we can do with the tight budget that we have. I'll check again, maybe in vain, but any questions online? Any new questions from the audience? I don't know if Jason or Tom, you have anything you'd like to add? I know, Tom, we've talked a lot about finance, and I don't know if there's anything, Jason, you want to highlight.
Thank you, Mayor. I think from my perspective as administrator, it's across the organization and working with the village board. It's home rule, to me, puts more tools in the toolbox of your local elected officials to make decisions, to identify options and solutions to the dynamic world that we live in. And I think that's, from my perspective, the biggest takeaway. There are often issues that come up, and we can look at what other communities do, and we can, and the first thing we always ask is there home rule or not? And if they are, that usually means their solution is not an option for us and for our village board to consider. And I think the whole limitless power thing is false. It's limited by your local decision makers. It's limited by their understanding of what this community needs and doesn't want. And instead, it's a limited tool or limitless tools in your toolbox to make decisions. And I think that's my biggest, benefit I could see to the community. There are areas when it comes to employment, how we hire police officers and firefighters. It's in my opinion, an archaic system as a non-home rule that we must follow that's set by state statute. It doesn't allow flexibility in a world where we must be flexible in hiring people and we want to attract and retain the highest quality public safety possible. I feel we're limited on a very structured process from the 60s or 70s. There's also some employment laws that are mandated on us that, again, if we had the tools in our toolbox, we could evaluate to determine are those the best options for our community. And we are located in 2 counties. Cook County is home rule. Their rules trump Village of Roselle local ordinances in some areas, which create some inconsistencies in our ability to govern and our ability to educate residents and businesses to say, sorry, you're subject to something different than the other part of town. So there are some challenges there in trying to provide services to a community that are governed by different rules based on the county that you're in. And if we're home rule, a home rule municipality preempts a home rule county. So it could allow our village board to unify things across the community as a result. And as we said with the infrastructure, we are at much of our infrastructure is at a certain life cycle now that a lot of things are coming due. A lot of our original infrastructure was installed and implemented by new home builders. It was on the backs of private developers who recoup their costs by selling the homes. We, the village, assume those public improvements, and now we're responsible for their replacement. So I think that's where we are as an organization and as a community, that our life cycle is at that 40, 50 year for a lot of this infrastructure. And it worries me, and I'm sure our finance director, without adequate tools, I don't know how we're gonna address those issues in a way that meets the expectations of this community to have a quality way of life here and to have, roads that are potholed and to have reliable water and sewer and the stuff we take for granted could be at jeopardy, I believe, if we don't have the adequate funding necessary to accomplish that. So those are kind of my key takeaways I wanted to highlight, David.
Thank you so much. And I'll check for the last time. Any questions from online? And any last questions in the audience? I won't belabor the point. I think I want to end on this note that at the end of the day, it's up to residents to make the final decision. This is not a board decision. And one thing that I did, every board member did, is we took an oath of office, and that was to serve this community's best interests. Not the people who voted for us, not the people who didn't even vote, this entire community. And so with me having a good conscience, I think we've provided an option for our community to consider. Either way, we will fund the improvements that we need to do. It's just a matter of how do we want to fund it. As I will continue to say as we wrap up this next month, treating sewage water is not optional. We have to do that. That is our job. How we pay for it and who pays for it is really the options that we have on the table today. And so with this referendum, I'm at peace with whatever outcome we have because we have a plan of action. It's just whether are we tackling the problem right in front of us today, or do we have options and tools to address broader issues and concerns? I think we're at a juncture here where we have to be realistic and honest with the community. I know that can be scary. It can feel like there's a lot of storm clouds on the horizon, but I know staff and our board are ready to meet the needs of this community in the best way that we can. It's just a matter of how effectively can we do it, and are we going to have to accept some lower standards in the future if we don't have the right funding to do that. And so with that, I appreciate everyone who participated here, and I appreciate those who are watching this. You'll have another opportunity to talk with the board informally on March 9th, so I hope everyone joins us at Village Hall. And share this with your friends and neighbors at the end of the day. It's easy to shout out into an anonymous online forums, but we have to engage and have conversations. I believe we can politely disagree on issues and still be friends and neighbors at the end of the day. We need to have discourse and have conversation, understand what's best for each of us. No two households are the same. And so the important thing is that we talk about it, understand and seek out information. So with that being the case, thank you again for attending, and we will be speaking to you soon. Thank you. Good night. So, sir, what I will say, since the official event's over, sir, I have no problem telling you, it's our suspicion that the robocalls are coming from the Illinois Realtors Association. They spend money